This is arguably the largest financial experiment humanity has ever witnessed, yet most people live through it without even noticing. Global debt, spanning public, private, household, and corporate sectors, has surged to levels no civilization has ever faced before. Today, governments borrow trillions as if it's trivial. Central banks conjure money with a few keystrokes. Families take out 30-year mortgages as casually as they buy groceries. Yet debt is still treated as something normal, harmless, and permanent. The reality is far more unsettling. Debt has always been a tool of power, a method of control, and a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to ignite. The real question isn't whether the massive mountain of global debt will trigger a crisis. It's when and who will bear the cost when the system eventually resets. To understand how we arrived here, we must trace debt back to its origins. Debt is as ancient as civilization itself. The earliest clay tablets in Mesopotamia, thousands of years before Christ, weren't literary works. They were records, ledgers noting who owed whom, how much grain, how many cattle. In these early societies, debt wasn't merely economic, it was sacred. Priests and kings oversaw the system, enforced obligations, and occasionally wiped them clean in sweeping jubilees to prevent social collapse. Picture that for a moment. The very survival of society depended on the occasional reset of its financial system. Debt was power, but too much of it was dangerous. Ancient rulers understood what modern leaders often seem to forget. You cannot enslave an entire population with obligations indefinitely. Eventually, the system cracks. Fast forward to the Renaissance, with the rise of banking dynasties like the Medici in Florence. Debt had shifted from grain and livestock to gold and credit. Kings and popes borrowed enormous sums to fund wars, construct cathedrals, and sustain empires. Yet debt always carried risk. Spain, flush with silver from the Americas, declared bankruptcy 4 times in the 16th century because the crown borrowed beyond its capacity. Lesson 1 emerges. Even nations overflowing with wealth can collapse under debt when ambition surpasses reality. Debt became more than personal. It became geopolitical. It financed wars, toppled dynasties, and redrew maps. The modern explosion of debt, however, began in the 20th century. After World War I, nations were burdened with debt so immense that repayment seemed impossible. Germany, saddled with reparations under the Treaty of Versailles, faced obligations so crushing that contemporary economists warned of destabilization. And they were right. Hyperinflation in the early 1920s forced Germans to carry wheelbarrows of paper marks just to buy bread. That crisis left deep scars, setting the stage for the political upheavals that led to World War II. Debt wasn't just numbers on a balance sheet, it fueled chaos. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Conference reshaped the global financial system. With the United States controlling 2/3 of the world's gold at war's end, the dollar became the anchor, convertible to gold at $35 an ounce. Other currencies pegged themselves to it. The goal was stability. The result was dependence. Every nation's debt, every government bond, every economic calculation now relied on the discipline of the U.S. economy. For a time, it worked, but the temptation to overspend never disappears. By the 1960s, with the costs of the Vietnam War and domestic programs piling up, the U.S. printed more dollars than it had gold. Foreign governments began demanding gold in exchange for paper. In 1971, Nixon ended the dollar's link to gold. Debt became untethered. Governments could borrow and print without limit, constrained only by trust. That moment marked a quiet revolution. Debt transformed from a finite resource into something seemingly infinite. With gold gone, central banks discovered they could manipulate interest rates to control the economy. Slower growth meant lower rates to encourage borrowing. Crises meant more debt to patch the gaps. Each rescue required more leverage than the last. In the 1980s, public debt soared under leaders like Reagan and Thatcher, justified as necessary for defense or economic reform. Developing nations borrowed heavily from Western banks, leading to the Latin American debt crisis when repayment became impossible. The pattern was set: chase prosperity with debt, then suffer when the tide turns. The 2008 financial crash wasn't merely a housing crisis. It was a crisis of layered debt, a pyramid of leverage so enormous that when one corner collapsed, the whole structure trembled. Mortgages were bundled into securities, sold to investors, insured with derivatives, and amplified by 30-to-1 leverage ratios. The collapse toppled banks, destroyed pensions, and forced governments to inject trillions in bailouts. Ironically, those who borrowed recklessly were rescued, while ordinary people endured unemployment, foreclosures, and austerity. Debt was exposed not as neutral, but as a system favoring the powerful. Since then, the numbers have gone from alarming to surreal. Global debt tripled in the last 20 years, surpassing $300 trillion by 2023, nearly 4 times the size of the global economy. Nations, corporations, and households alike have piled on. Some, like Japan, carry public debt over 200% of GDP. The United States adds trillions yearly, with minimal debate. Emerging economies borrow in foreign currencies, risking sudden collapse if interest rates rise. The system today is a precarious balancing act, dependent on the illusion that debt can expand endlessly without consequence. But debt has consequences. It distorts choices, fuels bubbles, shifts wealth, and enslaves future generations. Every borrowed dollar today is a claim on tomorrow's work. When debt surpasses the limits of repayment, the consequences are inevitable. History is filled with defaults, restructuring, inflation, and crises. Debt always resolves in one of 3 ways: repayment, inflation, or default. No empire or system escapes this truth. Yet debt has become invisible. Governments don't knock on your door when deficits rise. They issue bonds, quietly creating obligations in your name. Credit cards, leveraged stock buybacks, corporate profits, all are underpinned by borrowed money. Leverage is like gravity, gentle on the ascent, devastating on the fall. The financial system floats on promises that may not be honored. Consider the United States, the anchor of global finance. National debt surpassed $34 trillion in 2024, an abstract number, yet real in its implications. Each taxpayer shoulders hundreds of thousands of dollars in obligations. Interest alone rivals defense spending. Borrowing to pay interest, a burden many countries share. Across Europe, debt-to-GDP ratios remain above 100% in nations like Italy and Greece. In China, local governments and state-owned enterprises hide massive liabilities. Debt has metastasized everywhere. Politically, debt is seductive. Raising taxes upsets voters. Cutting spending angers more. Borrowing appears painless. But when interest rates rise, the cost becomes visible. Since 2022, rate hikes to curb inflation have shown exactly that. Governments facing tighter budgets, households struggling with mortgages, corporations hit with higher refinancing costs. Debt is a dormant predator. harmless while resting, deadly when it wakes. Yet debt continues to be portrayed as a path to prosperity. Students take on large loans for uncertain returns. Families stretch to buy homes. Nations are assured that deficits don't matter, thanks to central bank currency creation. This is the great lie. Debt is not free, infinite, or safe. History proves otherwise. When debt reaches unsustainable levels, there are only a few escape routes: inflation, restructuring, or default. Inflation quietly erodes the value of what's owed, already underway in many nations. Restructuring admits repayment is impossible, forcing renegotiation. Default is a refusal to pay altogether. None are painless. Ordinary citizens invariably bear the brunt, while those in power rarely pay. Debt is more than economics. It is power. It decides who gets rescued and who suffers. Banks are bailed out. Corporations restructure. Politicians retire comfortably. Meanwhile, ordinary people lose homes, jobs, and hope. Understanding debt is therefore essential for survival. Ignorance chains you to the system. Knowledge allows you to avoid becoming its victim. The lesson is clear. Debt isn't just numbers. It's a shadow over our future. History repeats. Debt builds. Leaders deny. Crises erupt. Societies reset. The only choice is whether you navigate this cycle awake or blind. Build real wealth, acquire knowledge, and maintain perspective. The system will repeat its patterns, but understanding them gives you a chance to survive. Please subscribe and support me to keep this kind of content coming. Goodbye.